Shalom, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back to YouTube. What is the Chabad approach to outreach? And we're going to talk about this based on the parsha this week. What is unique about Chabad? We know that that around the 1960s, early 1960s, perhaps around that time, Chabad started to get into the outreach business, reaching out to other Jews who are not observant, encouraging people to become more observant. And other organizations followed, and they started doing this as well. Chabad was probably the first organization to start a yeshiva for Balei Tshuva, for people who were returning back to Judaism, people who were raised not religious, and who became observant. This is the Yeshiva Hadar Torah in Brooklyn, New York, which was, I think, one of the first, if not the first yeshiva that was established for that purpose. Other organizations, other movements claimed that perhaps they were the first, but I think it was pretty clear that Chabad was the first to get on board in this type of movement. And to this day, Chabad is clearly the leader in this field. No other organization comes close to having the reach that we do in terms of being all over the world and becoming in contact with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Jewish people, from California to India to Europe, so all the continents, everywhere. Chabad is really in the forefront of this type of movement, with Chabad houses everywhere and different approaches to outreach. Our famous JLI, Jewish Learning Institute program, is world renowned. Chabad.org, we were the first ones to go into the field of cyberspace. The Chabad of cyberspace was probably the first Jewish organization to go into use the internet for outreach as well, with Rebbe Yossi Kazin many years ago. May he rest in peace. And today everybody's doing it. There are all kinds of organizations and different approaches, which is terrific. And really, it's almost impossible for a Jew to not have contact with someone who is going to reach out to them, invite them to their house for Shabbos, to encourage them to come and attend a class. And even when the pandemic came about, which presented a major problem for us, because for the first time we weren't able to meet people, talk with people face to face in person, we needed to reach out, and we're using, of course, the internet, as we're doing right now, to meet new people. And indeed, perhaps because of this, we are meeting more people than ever. So it's really a remarkable thing. While perhaps in the past we'd get 10 or 20 people coming to a class at a synagogue, now we're getting hundreds of people coming to a class. And these people are all over the world. So whenever there's a challenge, we meet that challenge and we go out, we respond to that challenge, and we're successful. And how many people have had contact with Chabad over the years that started becoming observant because of Chabad, that they met Chabad, they went to a Chabad house in China or someplace in Israel or who knows where. It's really quite remarkable. I'm meeting many people who are not Chabad people, but they're observant to this day, and they come up to me and they tell me, I got started with Chabad. So we were the ones, I think, really who started this whole movement. But what is different between us and everybody else? And I think this is the approach, and something I want to talk about. What is unique about our approach as opposed to everybody else's approach? Well, how did this start? When the Lubavitch Rebbe became Rebbe of the Chabad movement, Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson became Rebbe in 1951. He took over from his father-in-law, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who passed away a year earlier in the 10th day of Shvat, 1950. And his father-in-law was really someone who actually got this whole thing started in Russia by going out and sending emissaries all over Russia to different communities to establish synagogues and schools, Jewish schools, and mikvahs, and reach out to Jewish people all over Russia. So he really started this movement in quite a remarkable way. And when he recognized the fact that it was really impossible for him to continue any longer in Russia, that the communist authorities made it too difficult for him to do these things, he needed to go underground. And literally, his followers went underground. They established these things under penalty of death and imprisonment. Many of them ended up going to the gulags and things like that. And but if he himself, as the leader of the Chabad movement, could no longer stay in Russia. He was arrested one time, and he was miraculously freed from imprisonment. And he realized that the future was not going to be in Russia, although we needed to continue a presence there. But the question is where to go. So he decided to go to New York, because New York was really establishing itself as the center of Jewish life throughout the world. New York was a major city, and by having his movement established in New York, I imagine it gave a certain prestige and a certain power to this movement that it would not have anywhere else, even in Israel. So when you mentioned you're from New York is something big, something important, something prestigious. So he came to New York, and he established his movement continued to establish his movement in New York. And but he came to New York in 1940. He was a sick man, and he was tortured while in Russia, and he suffered from multiple sclerosis, and he was in a wheelchair by this time. He spoke very faintly, and he only passed away, I think, at the age of 60. So he was a relatively young man when he passed away. But he believed very much in outreach and in helping other Jews. And when his son-in-law took over the movement in 1951, his son-in-law dedicated himself to this task. Now, his son-in-law took over a movement which was a very small movement. The Chabad movement at the time was quite small, not like today. And it was centered in a house, not a synagogue even, a house in Brooklyn, New York, in Crown Heights, 770 Eastern Parkway. They prayed on the main floor, one of the rooms on the floor of the house. Give you an idea of how small the movement really was. And starting from the beginning, the Rebbe started talking about the importance of reaching out to other Jews and showing them the beauty of Torah mitzvahs. And he started to teach us. He started to learn with us the various aspects of Torah dealing with this idea. And so it went until finally in 1967 in Israel with the Yom Kippur War, with the 6-Day War rather. The 6-Day War, the Rebbe, like every Jew in the world, was very touched by this. And the Rebbe looked around at various mitzvahs that he could encourage other Jewish people to do that would help the war effort in Israel. Something that was easy, simple, and very powerful. Something that was extremely important. And he came upon the mitzvah of tefillin. Tefillin. Why tefillin? Because our sages tell us that when the non-Jews, when our enemies will see us wearing tefillin, it'll put fear into them. It'll arouse fear into them. So it'll help when we need help the most. So the Rebbe started his tefillin campaign, which was very successful, and people all over the world were putting on tefillin. Some of our detractors would say, "What are you doing? Putting tefillin on with somebody who's not religious? You just put the tefillin on, you say the Shema and take it off." But they didn't wash their hands. or they may go out afterwards and eat non-kosher food, or they're not religious at all. What are you accomplishing by simply doing something for 3 minutes? Why don't you talk with them, bring them over, encourage them, teach them Torah, do something like that? But the Rebbe said, no, tefillin, 3 minutes every day, except for Shabbos and holidays. And this will have a major effect on Jews. And that's what he did. And they established right away a table at the Western Wall, the Kotel. Soon after, it was liberated, and that table has been there to this day. And his followers have traveled wherever they go. They bring their children with them, and they encourage Jewish men and boys over the age of 13 to put on tefillin every day. How many Jews have become observant because of tefillin? How many Jews have started keeping kosher and Shabbos and getting married to another Jewish girl because of the tefillin campaign? It's an incredible thing. And this grew to other campaigns. The campaign of mezuzah, that you should put a mezuzah on your door. The campaign of love your fellow Jew. Campaign of kosher, that we should eat kosher food. The campaign of Bayis Malei Svarim, that we should have Jewish books in our home. Education, we should have a Jewish education, we should learn Torah, things like that. And one thing led to the other, till finally there were 10 mitzvahs, not including the mitzvahs of the various holidays. And each one of these became a project. They became a mivtza, a project. And each one became known as this particular, the mivtza of mezuzah, the mivtza of tefillin, the mivtza of kosher. So these were the various mivtzaim, candlelighting. Jewish girls and women should light candles every Shabbos and holiday. And these campaigns took upon themselves a new life, something that the Jewish world had never seen before. We know about mitzvahs, but we didn't know about mivtzaim, that projects we didn't know about. And people ask, well, why aren't other things in there, like keeping Shabbos? Observance of Shabbos was never a mitzvah. But it's certainly a mitzvah, but it's not a mitzvah. Why? Well, perhaps because it's too vast and it's too hard, and it's too difficult for a person to do all at once. But certainly people who started doing the others started keeping Shabbos also. There are there's 613 mitzvahs in the Torah, and there are only 10 mivtzaim, 10 of these projects. Why did the Rebbe single out these particular projects? And I think the reason is because A, they are important, very important. B, they're simple to do. C, it doesn't take much to do them, and they can lead to other things as well. So by starting to do it, you put a mezuzah on your door, and you put a kosher mezuzah up there, and every day when you're passing by your door, you see that mezuzah, you give it a kiss, and you're reminded of who you are and what you need to do. Further, more than even that, and how can you have a mezuzah on your door and not keep Shabbos or Yom Kippur or things like that as well? So it can lead to new things as well by doing them. I know many examples of young girls who started to light Shabbos candles from the age of 3 and up. And they came home to their mother. They learned in Hebrew school about Shabbos candles. And the mother said, oh, we're not religious. We don't do that. And after the girl would continually ask her mother to light Shabbos candles, finally the mother would acquiesce and she would do that also. And this led one thing to another thing until eventually the family became completely observant. So it really became a remarkable thing. So I think there was a tremendous brilliance on the Rebbe's part in these particular 10 mivtzaim, particularly 10 mivtzaim. And exactly what are these 10 mivtzaim? I will tell you. Each day I carry within me a card, my business card, for example. Here is my business card over here for Chabad of University City. And on the back of the card, I have the 10 mivtzaim. And what are they? As I said, put on tefillin every day. boys from the age of bar mitzvah and up, mezuzahs on every door, that they should be kosher mezuzahs, not just a shell of a mezuzah. That people should eat kosher food. They should work towards eating more kosher food. Again, this is a vague idea. What do you mean kosher? What, anything specific? No. For one person, it may be significant just to abstain from milk and meat. For another person, maybe just to start keeping kosher meat or just kosher products. For another person, it may be koshering their entire house, which is the goal. What else? Shabbos candles for girls and women over the age of 13. Here, over the age of 3. Here are also charity boxes that people should have a tzedakah box in their home. And every day they should give some tzedakah, a penny or two or more, except for Shabbos and holidays. And the Rebbe encouraged that we have tzedakah boxes in our home and also in our car as well, so that we're always surrounded with mitzvahs. Torah books in our home. Torah study every day as well. The laws of family purity, mikvah, that we should observe those and learn about that. Jewish education for every child, and finally, loving your fellow Jew. So these are the 10 mitzvahs that the Rebbe encouraged. And people all over the world started to do it. What a crazy, wild, amazing way of doing it, of doing outreach. Whoever would have thought of something like that? The mitzvah projects, an incredible idea. And these things added onto them an amazing way of doing it. And that was in a fun way. That Judaism now was going to become fun. It was going to become enjoyable and pleasurable. Now we have to understand, late 1960s, early 1970s, we had just come out of the Holocaust. The Holocaust, World War II finished in 1945. This is only 25 years after the Holocaust, after the greatest destruction of Jewish lives in the most horrendous way possible, that it had finished. Jewish people were then, and still are, suffering from the trauma of the Holocaust. If you did not lose any relatives, we're affected by it. We still are affected by it. I remember once, the first time when I was a young kid, seeing a film about the Holocaust, and I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe that people would do that to each other in such horrible ways. And it led the Jewish people to re-examine the whole idea of anti-Semitism and fight anti-Semitism. And then we became engrossed with the idea of saving the Jewish people from the Soviet Union. And people started to make movements, campaigns to get the Jews out of Russia, or to allow Jews to practice Judaism freely in Russia. And the Jews of Syria and the Middle East. And everything was a project. Everything was something that we needed to take care of. Being Jewish was not fun. Being Jewish meant you needed to save these Jews or save those Jews, or remember terrible, horrible things that happened to Jews. It became fighting anti-Semitism in many different ways. And it is that way today as well. You'll speak today to most Jews and you'll ask them, what are the main goals of Jews today? And they'll say probably two things: anti-Semitism and tikkun olam, making the world into a more just place. Those are the two things. Well, a young Jew growing up says, hey, this is overwhelming for me. There's so much hatred in the world, so much injustice in the world. Is this what I have to devote myself to solely? I would say, well, yes, that's important. But what is the whole point of being a Jew? Being a Jew means to fight anti-Semitism, to work towards justice in the world. What about being a Jew means to be happy in their Jewishness, to enjoy their Jewishness, to celebrate a Shabbos, to sit down and attend a beautiful class of Torah study? So you would say, well, come on. The important thing is to fight anti-Semitism, to make the world into a better world. But the fact is that is not accomplishing something which is even more important than that. And that is to make Jews more Jewish. Today, today people have established Holocaust memorials all over the world, museums of the Holocaust. Every city wants a museum for the Holocaust. But to give more money for Jewish education, perhaps instead of having such big monuments to the Holocaust, we should certainly have them, but instead of having them, we should put more money into Jewish education to teach our youngsters programs like Birthright, programs like Chabad houses, and classes and things like that. And we would accomplish a lot more by doing that than building museums. Museums are, of course, important, but the millions and trillions of dollars that are being put into museums all over the world are not making our Jewish kids more Jewish. In fact, it's not stemming the tide of intermarriage among Jews. We need to strengthen Jews, and this was something that the Chabad movement, under the leadership of the Rebbe, was devoted to doing. And that was really the goal of the Chabad movement, to make Jews more Jewish. And when the Jews are more Jewish, there will be less anti-Semitism in the world. There'll be more people to fight injustice in the world. And naturally, these things will happen. But our first priority needs to be to strengthen the Jewishness of our people, especially our young people. And in that, Chabad has devoted itself to doing that. How have we done it? So the Rebbe had a remarkable approach. He said, make things fun, make things enjoyable. So on Sukkot, we put a sukkah on a truck. We call it a sukkah mobile. I haven't seen in this Torah anywhere about a sukkah mobile. And we take it all around, and we encourage people to make the blessing of Lulav and Esrog and to come into our sukkah mobile and to say a blessing. The Chabad sukkah mobiles are famous. They're all over the world. We have, of course, the tefillin campaigns that people should go and put tefillin on with people all over the place. For each of the holidays, we've established shofar factories before Rosh Hashanah to teach people, especially kids, how a shofar is made, so that when the holiday comes, they say, hey, I made one of those. I have one of those. And these are actual shofars. Each holiday is like that. For Simchas Torah, how are you going to get kids to come to shul and hear the Torah being read? Well, if you have an ice cream kiddush after davening, believe me, every child in the world will want to come to shul. Whoever thought of such a thing, an ice cream kiddush? You will not find a Chabad center anywhere in the world that does not have an ice cream kiddush on the first day of Shavuos. In some communities, they don't even have a minyan, but they have an ice cream kiddush so that the people can feel the warmth and the love and the happiness of Shavuos, so that our kids see that Shavuos is fun. It's a fun holiday. I ask you, who else makes Shavuos fun? Of course, there's singing and dancing, but a lot of times it's just for adults. So Chabad makes Shavuos fun. Before Passover, we have matzah bakeries, not real bakeries, but pretend matzah bakeries where the kids learn how shmur matzah, how matzah is made. And they can take it home with them. Of course, we're told that they are not to eat that matzah. It's chametz matzah. But we also always give them an actual shmur matzah in a box to save for their Pesach Seder. So the Pesach comes along and they have that, but they know that they made a matzah also, and what it takes to make a matzah like that. So all the holidays become fun. On Hanukkah, we have grand Hanukkah menorah lighting ceremonies and parties all over the world. On Purim, we have Purim parties and Megillah readings everywhere. We give out shalach manos all over the place, gifts to the poor and gifts of hamantashen and things like that to each other. We make Judaism a fun, enjoyable experience for people of all ages, for men and for women. And our services are also more fun, more singing, some dancing, and things like that. So Chabad is known for this kind of craziness, if you will, this kind of silliness. And why is that? What happens here? So in this week's Torah portion, we read Moshe went to Paro. And we know the story about the plagues in Egypt. And in a nutshell, we know that Each plague, according to Rashi in the commentaries, each plague took, or most plagues anyhow, took 1 week. They were 1 week in duration. A couple exceptions. The plague of darkness was 6 days, and the plague of the firstborn was obviously just 1 day, 1 night. But the rest of them were 7 days, and in between those days, there were 3 weeks approximately that there was no plagues. The plagues started around Rosh Hashanah time, and they lasted about 6 months. During that time, the Jewish people stopped working. They no longer worked anymore, but they still remained in slavery. Question that Rebbe asks is why did it take so long? Obviously, don't you think that Pharaoh would have got the message if the plagues were a much shorter duration? During that 6 months from Rosh Hashanah till Pesach, the Jewish people were not working, but they were still in Egyptian Gullus. They were still in Egyptian exile. And each plague took a great deal of time, took a month from the time, 1 week approximately that the plague took place, and then another 3 weeks after that for the Egyptians to think about it. And why did these plagues take place altogether? So there are 2 explanations that Rashi gives. One explanation is for the Egyptians, basically to punish the Egyptians for what they did to the Jewish people over the years. And the other is for the Jews, to show the Jews the power of God, that this is incredibly what God is capable of doing, and that it should instill in us a fear of God, the idea that God is really in charge. And but the question comes up, as the Rebbe points out, it's a klutz kasha. It's a big question. Why was it necessary for most of them to last a whole month? 1 week of the plague and another 3 weeks for them to think about it. Couldn't Pharaoh have got the point after simply 1 day, and he would have understood it, and then another plague would come, and the Jewish people would have been out of Egypt in 10 days, or a little bit longer than that perhaps, but certainly not 6 months. Why did it need to be like that? And he answers that it was necessary for it to sink in, for Pharaoh to think about it, to really look into it deeply, and for the Jewish people to recognize what's going on. If it would have happened 1, 2, 3, it wouldn't have had the effect as it had with 10 plagues. And God, certainly like a big movie producer, wants effect. The effect is as important as the actual event itself. And therefore, Pharaoh at first thought about it and changed his mind. Thought about it again and changed his mind. And as time went on, he thought about it more, till eventually his advisors urged him to let the Jewish people go. That didn't happen at the beginning. It happened much later. At the beginning, it says that Pharaoh hardened his heart, and later it says his heart was hardened. His heart was hardened. He couldn't no longer control what was going on. And the effect of what was going on was very, very important. And so it is, the Rebbe points out that when we do outreach programs, we can think to ourselves, what have we accomplished? We put tefillin on with somebody, and then afterwards they walk home, they walk away, we never see them again. What have we done? Have we caused them to change their life in any which way? Well, sometimes we have, and sometimes we haven't. Sometimes it can take a long time before the effect works on a person. Just like sometimes you take an aspirin or some kind of a medication, and it doesn't right away take care of the problem. It can take a little while for the drug to set in and for your condition to improve. It doesn't always improve right away. So we need to have a great deal of patience. And in this regard, Chabad has patience. Chabad is probably the only movement in the world that really has patience. For us, we're not rushed. We are not rushed. We take things very slowly. and very gradually. And we keep in touch with people, but we do not expect results immediately. And we don't push people. We don't give guilt trips to people. We don't do that. Gradually. I remember one time I attended a Simchas Torah in a yeshiva, a prominent yeshiva in Israel, many, many years ago when I was a student. And they were telling me in the yeshiva that they take these non-religious boys, they invite them to come to the yeshiva, and they sing and dance with them. And after a week or two, and they encourage them to come and stay in the yeshiva for a little while. And then after a week or two, they start telling them to wear a white shirt, not a colored shirt. And then a week or two later, a few weeks later, they encourage them to wear a black hat. And then a few weeks later, they encourage them to stay longer and to give up their college studies or their previous life. And so forth. A week later, they do this. A week later, they do that. So finally, after a month or two, they're doing everything. They're observing everything. Very nice. I asked the rabbis, but what if they don't? What if they don't do everything so quickly? What do you do then? And he says, then we ask them to leave. We don't have patience for that. They're either going to come along quickly or they're not going to come along. We don't want them here because they can be a bad influence on others. That's not the Chabad approach. The Chabad approach is like with Pharaoh, gradual, slowly, over time. A mitzvah here, a mitzvah there. And that was another approach of the Chabad movement. One mitzvah at a time. Take a person, like a girl, like Shabbos candles. Okay, they're going to go afterwards. They're going to go to the movies. They're going to go to a non-kosher restaurant. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But at least they'll light that Shabbos candle. And by lighting the Shabbos candle, that mitzvah is like put in the safe deposit box. And it never leaves. It's always there. Once we do a mitzvah, the mitzvah stays with us forever, no matter what we do later. And that is the beauty of this approach. It's a unique approach, a remarkable approach. I heard once one of the former heads of the conservative movement, when he was inaugurated, he said, we have to take the approach of Chabad, one mitzvah at a time. Don't worry about the other things that they do or don't do, just one mitzvah at a time. Many of his contemporaries, his followers, fellow conservative rabbis came out and said, definitely not. Our people don't do anything already. You want to encourage them not to do anything more. Just one mitzvah you want from them. You need more than that. He said, you don't get it. You don't get it. They're not going to observe everything right away. Just start with one thing. Start with one mitzvah and take it from there. And you need to have tons of patience with them, that eventually they will grow and everybody will grow in the observance of mitzvahs. It takes time. And for it to be lasting, it takes a lot of time. We do not encourage people who come into our doors to observe everything. We don't do that. In fact, we even discourage it. Because if they become too religious too quickly, they will become less religious quickly also. They'll give up everything quickly. And I know people like that. I once had someone in my home who, for Pesach, and he complained that I didn't put a cloth underneath the spout to catch any chametz that might come through my spout on Passover. I said, I don't do that. The spout is good enough. It catches whatever it catches. There's a piece of screen underneath it. You don't need to do that. And he just left my house because he couldn't be in a house and they didn't do that. Can you imagine that? A few years later, he completely left Judaism. Never mind the cloth with the spout. He left everything. Divorced his wife and recently, God forbid, committed suicide. So people who are very fanatical and who do things quickly, very fast, will end up leaving it very fast as well. We have to watch out for them. Chabad rabbis are experts at teaching people Torah, teaching people Judaism, and how to do it, and gradually to do it, and do it with love, and do it without a sense of guilt or for what we've done in the past. Don't dwell on the past, but dwell on now and what you're doing now and the beauty of now. And therefore, this approach is a unique approach. I've had people in my community who have complained to me that I do not push more Judaism and Jewish observance on them. I'm not forceful enough. And I tell them, you're telling me how to run my business? I know how to run my business. I follow the lead of the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told us to do it in this particular way. I remember years ago, we have a parking lot in our synagogue that cannot be closed for Shabbos. The way it works is we encourage people not to drive on Shabbos, but people do come to shul sometimes and drive here. And many people don't know about that. So sometimes they'll come by, they'll come into our parking lot, and they'll leave their car in the parking lot. So we believe in one mitzvah at a time. One time there was a person in our shul who came to move to our community, and he saw that people were coming into the parking lot on Shabbos. They were driving on Shabbos. So he took upon himself to go out there and to yell at them and tell them not to drive on Shabbos and not to park in the parking lot on Shabbos. And he became quite forceful at it. The people were complaining to me. People were saying, hey, this guy is yelling at us. He's condemning us and everything. So I went to him and I told him, we don't do that. That's not our approach. Our approach is an approach of love, of happiness, of caring for people, not yelling at people. We could encourage them not to drive on Shabbos in a more gentle, positive way. Not that. He came at me and yelled at me. He said, your problem is that you are not forceful enough. These people are never going to keep Shabbos as long as you treat them with kid gloves. It's not going to work. That approach is a wrong approach. I said to him, this is our approach, and we will stay at that approach as long as I'm the rabbi of the synagogue. That will be our approach. We don't yell at people. We make people feel comfortable and happy. That's our approach. And this fellow became so angry and yelled at me so much that he left the synagogue. He stopped coming. And 6 months later, I understood he left and he moved someplace else. He got a job somewhere else. And the last I heard from him, one time I was in the airport and I was waiting for a plane to take off. And who do I see but this fellow? He had moved to Arizona, and he came up to me, and I recognized him right away, but I didn't know he would recognize me. He came up to me, and he was wearing a yarmulke and everything. And he said to me, Rabbi Leider, you remember me? I said, yes, I do. And he said, I want to apologize for what I did. I realize now it was very wrong. And your approach is the correct approach. And I was not right to yell at you or to yell at the people in the synagogue. And I realize now. Of course, why didn't he? It took him 6 months. It took him a long time later years later to recognize that and to understand that. But better late than never, as they say. Our approach has been a very successful approach. It's our approach. It's the way Chabad works. We have been very successful at it. We've established Chabad communities all over the world, which welcome Jews of all shade and color everywhere to a Shabbos meal, to a song, to happiness, to a class. It's worked, and it's been very successful. So if we help another Jew put a mezuzah on their door, don't necessarily think it's going to happen right away. Just like with Pharaoh, it took 6 months, it took a long time. But what will happen as a result of that, what will be caused as a result of that, could be very magnanimous. So I'd like to encourage you all to go out there, to reach out to your fellow Jew, and even today to non-Jews to keep the 7 Noahic laws. But don't expect results right away. And when it happens, be happy when it happens, even one mitzvah at a time, one mitzvah after the other. So I want to wish you all a good Shabbos, and keep in mind that this Saturday night is Yud Shvat, the 10th of Shvat. There'll be Farbrengens all over the world. Go online to your local Chabad houses or to Chabad.org and join a Farbrengen, a gathering in honor of Yud Shvat. Shalom, shalom. There we go.
Perfect. Beautiful.